James the Chamas Quachich. Dr. Amas Taklapas Gucha. So good that you came today. Holkentlo Paco Lixbin and Slam Khala Chach Guncha. I'm just going to read my prayer here today. And was Kluten the and Slam Khala. It's a bilingual prayer. Sham Ach Mutta Ukhamich in English and our language. Kalantwi and Snuknuka. Listen, my friends. Kan langkit is Tamal Kasla, in Kashait Kanskasla, the Timih Kasla, Kus Kasla, the Including Kasla, with the Entlakment Kasla. I pray for our children, our families, our land, our waters, our language, and our culture. Azuta I Smalt Kasla, Azuta Iwa Kwan Snimus, Koskapat Wita Ochal, especially for our children, especially for those taken from us, that they can come back to their home. Kan lamkhid titmih kasla, but they ikos kasla. I pray for our land and our waters. Thank you, Creator, for our land and our waters. This is the land of the Lilwat. From the footprint, the mark of the transformers by Gates Lake. Ata Tishuti Kasla, Shawat Nishminas, Hubi Jim, Titimih Kasla, to the winter spirit place where Hubi Jim is a steward and keeps watch on our land. Ata Tatlaksha, Tipishirtna, Tishkaina, Shakozachut, I Tuwita Ukhanihu, to the east side of the Stein Valley where the young men go to train to find direction in their lives. Slata at the Shakcha, Shachush, Tenilkiha, Ilitwata, Nitlakast, Titmikwa. From there to Gunsight Mountain where the Lilwat tied off on top of the mountain when the earth flooded. Slati Akun Kukcha Shat, the Kalkampton Chat, the Kinkanapa, the Washat Stali, the Tmikasa. From there to the east side of the Black Tusk where the Thunderbird sits and watches over our land. Slati at the Shkotlusha, el the Shihapa. From there to the face carved on a face of a tree on the east side of the Toba River by Zoltan Creek. Slati in Zanam Eish, the Rapten Shat, the Lilwata Huatwat, Shatut Taki, Lilwata, Shastuchihuit, and Awesome. From there to the east side of the Lilwat Glacier, where the people crossed when they went to trade. Slati Ako and Kukum Shati and Pelkashkum. The Kakautin and Kukums, the Timiksha, Ililwata. From there to the north of Groundhog Mountain, the northernmost place of the land of the Lilwat. And Aich Ati Tishkwachta, Timichkasa. Timiksha is Chmalkasa. Then from there back to the footprint is our land, the land that belongs to our children. Creator, watch over our land. Lachlachsten mus quilsten. Pleasing tumus is smelt kasla, is nkscheitken kasla, titmich kasla, tikluten kasla, with that the ntlakmen kasla, hard swatch kaskuncha. Remember us, Creator, bless our children, our families, our land, our language, and our culture. We are in a bad way today. Kan langkit ismat kasa mutatakum is Chamalta or Kwan. I kalash mutaskuncha. Koskat at wita nwatan na timihui. I pray for our children and all the children that were taken before and today, that they can come back to their homelands. Kan lamkit Staatskassa Georgina was ka okwal stuma was lip ako misna mim school. I pray that we can bring our Auntie Georgina home. She is buried at the Mission Residential School. Skins kos okwalat men achas to me tienwatan siya. She has been wanting to come home for a long time to the land she is from, her home. Kan lamkit siskos kasla skakas. Takam tismawal siya kus min nas iukamih kasa. Ti klutens kasa mateti ukamihwa and tlakmans kas. I pray for our sister Terry. All her life she worked for our people, on our language and on our Aboriginal rights. Dan zam ho zam ku winah mutta ku scho nelig kos nash is nua quilston. Munach nu nash diskoza shwa cooks to mushka quilston. She is going to rest now in truth and reconciliation. She is going to be with you, Creator, because she has put her trust in your Son, Jesus Christ. Lan kututlit nies, snukas kasla, Donald Menzel, wakoch, wadam lamchit, tims laksha koch akoticha atmich. Cooks to muskach, die smawal shwa, Donald, toch gachlo amakos kaich. Okay, so Donald Menzel too is on his way to the land up there. Thank you, Creator, for Donald and his life. He was a good friend. Wina waskas saklik skuncha waskas ho nil stwal. It's true, we are healing today. We are in reconciliation. Nukan tumus quilston with that takam iuhu khalmikwa kwaska shewa tisptino shemiha kwaska amha tiskwak kwiha kwatlikix amastwal kwatkaska swalstwala. Help us, Creator, and all people to be able to forgive, heal our hearts, and to learn to care for each other and love each other, for all people. Rishti and Shlamchal, Tishkwachi Shash, Shizikri, Amasil Hash. That is my prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amati. It is good. Kuks Timushka, Quilkston, thank you, Creator. Wakatan Chims. Thank you, Creator. We honor you for this day.
At this time, I'd like to thank Hatya for coming up here and sharing his prayer with the people. You know, that was a beautiful prayer. And he involved everybody in his prayer, talking about our people, talking about coming together, talking about healing. I'd like to thank Hatya for always being there, you know, and speaking our language and keeping our language alive. You know, that was one of the things that they tried to take away from us, is our language. And Hatya works at Hiklolo School, and he's one of our fluent speakers that is working there today. So I'd like to thank Hatya for that beautiful prayer.
And Kukka Swinosta, my sister Lorna is going to tell us some stories. Cooks to Muslas, Kushquilston, Kushwinosta, Totlach Zoms, Laxia, Scotland, to Muslas, Gunsha. We thank the Creator for Lorna. We are honored she came to tell us stories today. So, katitwe ha, kalantwe, hui skoklen tumus ha, hui skoklen tumus, winosta, sima. Oh, okay.
Kalantwe, nchnook تقطع مشلقة بالجونة كان مكمن تولى الجونة تتميش كاسة. It's a real honor for me, Wanosa, Lorna Williams, to come to spend time with you today. And it warms my heart that you've come to hear these stories, to hear our songs, to hear our laughter, and to remember our people who live on these lands. I said it's good that we've come together to collect here on these lands, to bring our energies to flow together. It's a very special word in Uhualmiuch, in our language, in Muhmintwatla, which means that when we come together, that in the way that we have, we come together and we let our energies flow in a way that connects each of us to why we've gathered here today. We're gathering on this day for a very special reason. It's called the Truth and Reconciliation Day. It's something that's happened in this country that I didn't think I would ever see or witness or experience. And I brought a book with me that, had I been thinking better, I would have had copies here for you. But it's this book. It's called North of Nowhere. And I want you to know that I recommend that you read this book. This woman is speaking right now in Ottawa. She was one of the Truth and Reconciliation Commissioners, Marie Wilson, a non-Indigenous person, but a person who grew up on our lands and heard our stories, and her children are of the land of the North. This book is a book about her experience as one of the commissioners in traveling from coast to coast to coast here in Canada, listening to people's stories of their experiences in residential school. She tells a very good story about this journey of hers. And it's such a beautiful rendition of her experience, of listening to the difficult stories. And it's important that we learn from her. And so I recommend this book to you, North of Nowhere, Marie Wilson. And I'm just going to pass it around. And I don't share this very often. No, I'm going to begin. First, I want to thank my brother for the prayer that he brought to us. And I want to thank him for remembering our sister, our Auntie Georgina. I'll tell you the story about her in a little while. I want to thank the singers, the drummers, who opened us in a good way. Our community has remained strong and resilient through all kinds of harrowing experiences because we've remembered our songs. Growing up, they kept us strong. And I'm telling you that our songs are known in many of the First Nations communities, not just here in British Columbia, but across Canada, because it's been the songs of our people that have kept us together and kept us going. I want you to know that when you hear these songs, know that they're the strength of our people. It means a lot to me that many of the people from my home community are here, and people from Tamaquam, farther below. And so people here from Darcy, from Seaton, and there are many I know here I went to school with. Yesterday I met Bobby Menzel at the coffee shop. I asked him who he was. I didn't remember. We're old. Bobby and I graduated high school together, and many people in this community. And so it's very special that both communities have come together. It's important. And that's a very good example and model of reconciliation, that we've come together to listen to the songs of these lands and to introduce ourselves to each other. And I'd like you to do that at some point during this time that we are spending together. So I'm going to begin, and I'm just going to tell you some stories, mainly about the things that I know, because that's how we learn, that's how we teach, that's how we share. And I want to tell you about our experience, not just with residential schooling, but with day schools and our own school. Because it's been that story that I think really tells you the story of the Indigenous peoples of these lands. I was born at home in Mount Currie. I tell you this because I was born premature, so I came into the world with a struggle. But my mom was the midwife and the healer of our community. So she knew what to do. But she had a friend, a woman who came from Scotland, Sarah Pemberton, who was a nurse. And she and my mom became really good friends. They did so much work together. It was a partnership that was really special. And Sarah brought me into the world. And she named me. She gave me my name. I hated that name because nobody else had that name. But I grew to to accept it and to respect it. I came into this world and entered the world of the Lil'wat. I spoke no other language as a young child. But when it was time for me to go to school, my brothers, Billy, who's no longer here, Larry, who's my brother, Lloyd, who's here, were walking me to school for my grade 1. And they told me I had to learn English, this language. And so the first 3 English words I learned that they taught me, my brother said, when the teacher looks at you like this, he said, you say yes. And he said, when she looks at you like this and her eyes go like this, you say no. And then he said, if you don't know, you say maybe. So those were my first 3 English words. But we had a very large class, 45 kids, and our teacher was quite amazing. She taught, so our class was grade 1, 2, and 3. And she was a very good teacher. And we learned, and I learned, and it was exciting for me. But in grade 2, my mom and dad dressed me up and brought me and my sister Veronica, who's sitting here, to the train station. The train came. I thought we were all going. The train came, and only she and I in our family were put on the train. We were being sent to Williams Lake, to St. Joseph's Mission Residential School. And if some of you watch documentaries and films, there was one recently on the Knowledge Network called Sugarcane. And that's a story about the school that we went to. That was quite a harrowing experience for me to have the train pull out and see my mom and dad at the station and not know what was happening to me. Many of our people were sent there, but there were many more sent to other places. Our other sister was sent to Mission. And she spent her entire school life there. That's my sister Mary. And that is where the auntie that Bert talked about, Georgina, also went to residential school. That's where my mom and dad went. That's where my mom and dad met. And one of the stories that my dad told me, you rarely talked about this, but he talked about digging graves. And one day, he was digging graves, and it was only later that he realized that one of the people put into those graves was his sister. He never forgot her. He always remembered her. And one day, he brought our uncle to show him the spot of where he had dug that grave. But when they got there, it was now paved over, and it was a skate park. So she's still there. And we'd like to bring her home. My other sisters were sent to Kamloops. And all of you, I'm sure, on the news have heard of Kamloops, the residential school where they did finally acknowledge that they were the unmarked graves of our children. My brothers didn't go to residential school. And this was the strength of my uncle and my father, my auntie, and my mom. When it was time for them to go, they were brought into the mountains because our people still spent, thankfully, lots of time in the mountains. And so there were many people in our community who didn't go because of that. But there were many, many more who did. I want you to imagine a community, this community. I want you to imagine our community, where children are the strength of a community, where a community revolves around the laughter, the struggles, and the beauty of children. I want you to imagine children playing, screaming, laughing, and exploring the land. I want you to imagine children being told stories. I want you to imagine children being encouraged to help, to clean, to feed the community. Because that was our natural life. And then, I want you to imagine the morning sun coming up and to not hear any sounds of children. Because all the children were gone, not just to residential school, but I told you some hidden in the mountains, and others in hospitals, because at that time, we could not go to a hospital or health care that was for white people. We had separate hospitals. And so because of illnesses that were emerging that we'd never experienced before, many of our people were sent there. And so I want you to imagine what that might be like if you have children, to all of a sudden one day to not have them home, to not really know where they were and what their experiences are. How devastating might that be to people, to mums and dads, to aunts and uncles, to siblings. So when we arrived in Mission in Williams Lake, St. Joseph's Mission. We were taken off the train in the middle of nowhere. And a truck brought us to the school. The time there for me was scary because I didn't know what was happening. One of the first things they did was they had us remove all our clothes and they cut my hair. My family took pride in my long hair. I had hair that almost reached the ground. And my mom used to lovingly braid my hair. And when I got to the school, they cut it off. And nobody talks about this. But we cut our hair only in a time of mourning, when someone close to us passes. And so this act of cutting my hair devastated me. You know, because I was far away from home. I didn't know what had happened to my mom and dad. And now they were cutting my hair. There were so many things at that young age of 6. I was just turning 7. That were such a puzzle to me. And that was what it was like in residential school, where we never knew what kind of food we were going to get. And I remember one day we were given food and I smelled it and it didn't smell right. So I didn't eat it. And some of the children were so hungry, they took the food that we didn't eat and they ate it. And 2 of them died from that food that we didn't eat, but they did. But we were punished for not eating that food. And I remember being dragged to the middle of the floor, and I had to kneel down, and a plate of food was put in front of me. And I had to stay there, and the only way that I could leave was to eat the food that I didn't want to eat because it was bad. That's the experience. That's an experience at residential school. I've never shared this story with my family. But I think that it's important that we share these stories of actual experiences. One of the things that kept me strong, though, as this little child, trying to figure out life, that there were people in my community who were older, and sometimes after our showers, we'd gather, and somebody from my community, I remember Annette and Vera, were 2 of them, used to take me, and they couldn't really do much, but they could brush my hair. And the way that they brushed my hair and they spoke to me, kept me strong. They showed me love and caring that was a natural thing amongst our people. And that's what kept me going. Another experience that was significant for me, there were people from many, many communities, many language groups in that school. Although we couldn't use our languages, we were beaten if we did. It was very difficult to communicate because our teachers and the priests were mostly French Canadian. So they spoke French, but they were making us speak English. And so remember, I'd learned a few English words, and in my grade 1 class, I'd learned many more. But in those years at residential school, in 3 years, I had lost all capacity for language, for communication. I lost a little bit of English that I knew. I lost my capacity to speak my own language. I mixed up words from all the different languages that I'd heard. It was very confusing. The other thing that happened was there was a girl who was a bully in our school, and she broke my foot. She pushed a bench on my foot and my toe broke. Nobody helped me. I ended up crawling to class up a hill because I couldn't walk. I finally came home. So I came home with a foot that was broken, which now bothers me as an old woman. Because it had to be rebroken and reset. I came home with hepatitis. I came home with a broken spirit. I came home with not being able to communicate. On our way home in the winter time, it was so cold when they dropped us off at this station to wait for the train. The train was late. And there was another little girl, the same age as me. She might have been a little bit younger. Everybody in our community took turns rubbing us, rubbing our feet and our hands and our bodies so we didn't freeze. But all the other children froze, including my sister. When the train finally came, they put us on the train, and when people thawed out, everybody was crying. I'm telling you this story too, because on this train, there was a train man. Who realized what was happening to our people. And on this train was a nurse. And the train man and the nurse assessed all the children. And the train stopped, and every time the train stopped where there was a hospital, they decided which children were going to be put off and put into the hospital. Because people's ears were frozen, their limbs, and bodies, because we weren't dressed properly. And so all the way from Williams Lake to Mount Currie, people had been let off the train wherever there was a hospital. I know that the family of this train man, who was caring enough to look after us, that his family continues to live in Squamish. I'm always grateful that he took it upon himself to help our people. This nurse, I ended up working with her son. And I remember telling him the story, and he was able to tell me that that was his mom. I will always be grateful to her that she took it upon herself to look after our people. That's how we have survived. When people have come, our own people have come forward. And when other people have stepped up also to help. That's reconciliation. When we work together, when we can hear each other, and when we can tell each other stories. My community has always had a strength. Mount Currie, for those of you who don't know, was a community that was created in the 1800s, later in the 1800s, as they were making us live in communities. Because prior to that, our people lived the land. They lived on every part of these lands. Many of you, I'm sure, if you're on the land, you would find remnants of our people on your lands. Now, yours. And so Mount Currie, the old village of log houses, was the first time that we lived in a stationary community. And so that was a new experience for our people. And many of the stories that were told by my parents and my aunt and uncle and the old people in those in the village, they talked about the people coming into our valley to live. They also told stories, and some of those stories are in our songs and dances. Our stories of people who came. And so it's important for us to remember through those stories, through those songs, that of how these communities evolved and developed. And it's important that we share these stories. We haven't been able to. And it's important for people to remember. And I encourage you to create more opportunities to do this sharing. I want to thank Natalie, who organized this session. It's a very special one. It's the first time that we've been able to do that, to do this, to have this experience. It's special that it takes place in a barn. And I want you to hear the stories and to know the stories of how the people, the Litwat people, the Shlatlim people, have kept on going. There are many laws. There are many laws that sought to eradicate our languages, that were committed to eradicating our sense of history, our sense of connection to our lands. But our people have maintained those relationships. And I want to thank my communities, my Litwat and Tlaxcala communities for doing that. And I want to encourage you to share and to tell those stories. It's Mount Currie. I don't know where we got the strength, but Mount Currie is one of those places, one of those communities that rallied together to fight for our rights. And those are the stories I want you to ask about, because it's not really written anywhere. Mount Currie was the community that supported, for example, the Constitution expresses. Yes. And we were one of the first places that had protests and to fight for our rights. From the beginning of the 1900s and all through, we fought for our rights in 1967. And that right that we got was to be able to open our own school. Felicity Nelson, the chief's mom, and my sister Mary Louise were two teachers, two certified teachers who began working at making our own school. In 1967, I want you to think about that day, but I want you to begin first in 1947, the year that I was born, the year Bobby Menzel was born. We realized yesterday. 1947, there was a joint parliament, and a paper had been commissioned and presented and discussed in that joint parliament in 1947. That joint parliament and that paper, written by a man named Diamond Jeunesse. The title of that paper that he wrote and presented was called Liquidating Canada's Native Indians in 25 Years. Can you imagine? Did you know anything about that? No. Liquidating Canada's Native Indians in 25 years. The theme of that paper, the message in that paper, was residential schools had failed because those natives were still talking their language. Those natives were still connected to the land. They weren't speaking English here. And so that's when they developed what was going to be the entrance to the public school system. Your schools here, the money to build those schools came from the placement of our children. That's where it came from. You had small schools. A gymnasium was built in a school, classrooms, because the children from Mount Currie were going to be brought over. It took until 1960 for that to take place, for that to happen. That was when we first began to be able to attend a public school. But we were fighting for our rights. There was a man from the interior of British Columbia, George Manuel, who led the way. And because Trudeau's father, wanted to do away with the Indian Act. And he was going to make us Canadians. And so he was going to take away everything, our right to our community. And that was rattling for us, because although we didn't like the Indian Act, we still don't, but it was the only thing that kept the little bits of land that we had left in our name. It was the only thing. And so we fought against that Trudeau. And there was another paper that was presented by what is now the Assembly of First Nations. And it was the paper on Indian education for Indians. That was accepted, that was presented in Parliament and accepted. And so in 1967. And so, as I told you, we had people in our community who were teachers. We started our own school. And sitting here is my sister Georgina Nelson, the namesake of the Auntie Georgina in the grounds in Mission. She became the administrator. My mom used to drive, well, she had a car, she at that time didn't drive, but she's the one who would help them to get to Vancouver, to work with the politicians there, the Indian and Northern Affairs, to be able to do the work of getting our own school built. Mount Currie was the first school in British Columbia to start its own school. Did you know that? Some of you? That was special. It was the second school in Canada. The first one was in Blue Quills in Alberta. So this school nearby was a pioneer in that sense. We did a survey of our people because it was the first time our people were going to have an opportunity to say what they wanted their children to learn. And I was given the task of visiting every household in our community and asking people what they wanted their children to learn. They said, we want our children to continue to speak our language, because they could see that our language was shifting. They said we want our children to know our history, because up until then, there was nothing about us in the school curriculum, other than our role in helping the white people take our lands. They said they wanted our children to learn what happened to us, to learn about, at that time we didn't know the word colonization. This is an important idea because it's happened around the world. And what happened to us and our ability to talk about that, we can share with others. But they also said, we want our children to learn about that world. But we want them to be able to learn that world in their own world and to know that they live in those two worlds. And that's what we've tried to do. And so I just wanted you to know the hardships that my communities have endured. But I want you to know also the strength and the resolve and the ability to laugh and sing and pray and be together. That's our power. And I want you to think about that, because for so long, Canadians have been taught that Native people, the Indigenous peoples, First Nations, I mean, we can't even, it's hard to name us, but they look at us as less than. And we've always been devalued. And I want this door to open, and I want you to hold the door open and to enter each other's doors and to learn from one another, and so that we can celebrate each other, care for one another, and together care for the land, care for our communities, care for our children. And now I think it's time that you have some coffee and tea and Miki Lauschken. And Miki Lauschken is the bannock that they've prepared for you. I want to thank you. I want to say kukstumkala for listening to me and listening to those stories. And I want to encourage you to seek for more and to say a hello to one another, the people from these communities and the communities of the Lilwet and the Stadtlim. Kukstumkala.
So once again, I'd like to thank Lorna, Dr. Lorna Williams. This lady is very educated, and she lives in Victoria. She hasn't really talked about her education, but she works in Victoria, and she's very well respected throughout the world. Really thankful for sharing your stories, that is healing, to let all these people know who we are, where we come from, and where we've been, and to know that we have to make that connection as communities. And so we're going to give a little bit of time if anybody has any questions for Dr. Lorna Williams. She wanted to answer any questions that anybody has of her. You can sit down. So if anybody has any questions or comments that they want to share with Lorna, please step forward, maybe come to the front so she can hear. We have a mic on the floor here, if just so everybody can hear your questions or your comments that you want to share.
Lloyd was over there. I know that it's difficult. There's a mic here, and if anybody has any, not just questions, but comments.